This elephant couldn't stop smiling. The first time her video was shared from the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust in Kenya, it was hard not to stare at that face. She had this unmistakable curve to her tiny trunk and the brightest eyes, like she was trying to tell the world, "I'm okay. I'm still hopeful." The caption said she was just 3 weeks old, recovering in isolation at the elephant orphanage, but somehow radiating pure joy that seemed impossible given her circumstances. Her name was Kaya, and someone who saw that post said, "That's it. I have to support this sanctuary." When the video went viral, hundreds of people around the world felt the same magnetic pull. There she was in her small shelter enclosure, tiny and fragile, yet absolutely glowing with an inner light that captivated everyone who saw her. Her amber-colored eyes sparkled with curiosity instead of the fear and trauma that typically marked orphaned elephant calves. She looked up at the camera once, then gently reached out with her little trunk, like she already knew the world was watching and caring. That moment changed everything for elephant conservation. The rescue team had found Kaya wandering alone near the dried Galana River in Tsavo East National Park, dangerously close to predators and certain death from starvation. No mother, no herd, no protection. Just that incredible smile that seemed to defy her tragic circumstances. She was barely clinging to life when the Kenya Wildlife Service Patrol discovered her, severely dehydrated and weak, lying beside her deceased mother who had succumbed to the ongoing human-wildlife conflict that plagued the region. It felt like a miracle that Kaya had survived at all. At just 3 weeks old, she was far too young to fend for herself in the harsh African wilderness. Elephant calves typically depend entirely on their mothers for the first 2 years of life, nursing frequently and learning essential survival skills through constant observation and guidance. Without this maternal care, orphaned calves face overwhelming odds, with many succumbing to stress, malnutrition, or predation within days of separation. The rescue operation was a race against time. The wildlife rangers had to navigate treacherous terrain while maintaining radio contact with the veterinary team at David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, located over 200 kilometers away in Nairobi. During the grueling 6-hour journey, Kaya required constant medical attention, receiving IV fluids to combat severe dehydration and oxygen support to stabilize her weakened respiratory system. Dr. Angela Sheldrick, the head veterinarian at the Trust and daughter of the sanctuary's founder, had seen hundreds of orphaned elephants arrive at their facility over the decades. Each rescue brought its own challenges, but infant elephants like Kaya presented the most critical cases. The first 72 hours would determine whether she had the physical and emotional strength to survive this traumatic transition. When Kaya first arrived at the sanctuary, she was immediately placed in a specialized isolation shelter designed for the most vulnerable cases. This wasn't just any enclosure, it was a carefully controlled environment with temperature regulation, medical monitoring equipment, and 24-hour observation capabilities. The shelter itself was modest in size, roughly 12 feet by 8 feet, with soft bedding made from natural materials and gentle lighting that mimicked the dappled sunlight of the African savanna. For most orphaned elephants, those first days in isolation were marked by profound grief and confusion. Many calves would stand motionless in corners, refusing food and exhibiting clear signs of depression and trauma. Some would trumpet in distress, calling for mothers who would never answer. Others would become aggressive or withdrawn, requiring weeks or even months of patient rehabilitation before showing signs of recovery. But Kaya was different from the very beginning. Sarah Mitchell, the lead keeper who had been working with orphaned elephants for over 15 years, noticed something extraordinary about Kaya within hours of her arrival. While the tiny calf was clearly exhausted and in need of intensive medical care, there was something unmistakably resilient about her spirit. As Sarah approached the shelter for the first feeding, expecting to find a traumatized and frightened baby elephant, she instead discovered Kaya, standing near the entrance, trunk raised slightly in what could only be described as curiosity rather than fear. The moment that would later captivate millions around the world happened during Sarah's routine documentation of Kaya's condition. As part of standard protocol, all orphaned elephants were regularly photographed and filmed to monitor their physical and psychological progress. Sarah had her camera ready, expecting to capture the typical image of a distressed calf that would be used for medical records and funding applications. Instead, as Sarah began recording, something magical occurred. Kaya, who had been resting on her specially designed bedding, immediately perked up at the sight of the camera. Her large, expressive eyes seemed to focus directly on the lens, and then it happened. That unmistakable expression that looked exactly like a smile. Her tiny trunk curved upward in a perfect arc, her ears flapped gently with what appeared to be excitement rather than agitation, and her entire demeanor radiated an inexplicable joy. Sarah had worked with elephants long enough to understand their complex emotional expressions. Elephants are among the most emotionally intelligent animals on Earth, capable of displaying grief, joy, anger, and affection in remarkably human-like ways. But what she was witnessing in Kaya went beyond typical elephant behavior. This wasn't just contentment or mild curiosity. This was pure, unbridled happiness emanating from a creature who had every reason to be devastated. The video Sarah captured was only 37 seconds long, but it contained enough emotional power to move mountains. In those brief moments, viewers could see Kaya's transformation from a resting position to full alertness, the gradual emergence of her signature smile, and her gentle approach toward the camera with obvious affection and trust. The way she moved, despite her obvious physical weakness, demonstrated a spirit that refused to be broken by tragedy. What made this even more remarkable was the stark contrast between Kaya's demeanor and her recent trauma. Elephant experts worldwide would later comment that such emotional resilience in such a young calf was virtually unprecedented. Dr. Joyce Poole, one of the world's leading elephant researchers, noted that Kaya's behavior challenged many assumptions about how elephants process grief and trauma, particularly at such a vulnerable age. The shelter environment itself provided important context for understanding Kaya's remarkable adaptation. Unlike the chaotic and frightening circumstances of her rescue, the David Sheldrick facility was specifically designed to provide maximum comfort and security for traumatized wildlife. The walls were painted in earth tones that elephants found soothing. The flooring was specially designed to be gentle on sensitive feet, and the entire space was engineered to minimize stress while maximizing healing. Every detail of Kaya's daily routine was carefully orchestrated to promote both physical and emotional recovery. Her feeding schedule replicated the natural nursing patterns she would have experienced with her mother, with specially formulated milk provided every 3 hours around the clock. The milk itself was a complex blend of nutrients designed to match elephant milk as closely as possible, ensuring proper growth and development despite the absence of maternal care. Between feedings, Kaya's days were filled with gentle interactions designed to build trust and provide the social contact that elephants desperately need. Sarah and her team would spend hours simply sitting with Kaya, allowing her to explore their hands and clothing with her curious trunk, gradually building the foundation of interspecies friendship that would be crucial for her long-term rehabilitation. What consistently amazed the staff was how eagerly Kaya embraced these interactions. Most orphaned elephants required extensive patience and gentle coaxing before they would accept human contact. Many remained skittish and defensive for weeks or months. Kaya, however, seemed to actively seek out human companionship, approaching the keepers with obvious pleasure and displaying that characteristic smile whenever anyone entered her shelter. The feeding process itself became a daily celebration. While most orphaned calves approached their bottles with hesitation or desperation, Kaya turned each feeding into an interactive experience. She would use her tiny trunk to explore the bottle, gently touch the hands of whoever was feeding her, and maintain eye contact throughout the process. When finished, she would often continue to hold the bottle with her trunk, as if reluctant to let go of this symbol of care and nourishment. Dr. Angela observed that Kaya's behavior was providing valuable insights into elephant psychology and resilience. Previous research had suggested that elephants, like humans, could suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, with some individuals never fully recovering from severe trauma. Kaya seemed to be demonstrating that perhaps some elephants possessed an innate capacity for emotional resilience that allowed them to not just survive trauma, but to somehow transform it into a source of strength. The shelter's daily rhythms became perfectly synchronized with Kaya's natural patterns. She would wake each morning with obvious anticipation, standing near the entrance of her enclosure as if eager to begin another day of discovery. Her afternoon rest periods were spent in peaceful contentment, but she remained alert to every sound and movement around her. Evenings brought a special kind of magic as the golden African light filtered through the shelter's windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that seemed to enhance Kaya's natural radiance. Photography sessions, which were initially planned as routine documentation, evolved into something approaching portrait sessions. Kaya seemed to understand that the camera represented attention and affection, and she would naturally position herself in ways that created compelling images. Her instinctive ability to pose and her obvious enjoyment of being photographed added another layer to her already remarkable personality. The viral moment came almost accidentally. Sarah had finished her regular documentation and decided to share one particularly charming video on her personal social media account. She added a simple caption describing Kaya's age and situation, with no expectation that it would reach beyond her circle of friends and family. The video showed Kaya in her shelter, looking directly at the camera with her signature expression, then slowly approaching with her trunk extended in a gesture of friendship. Within 6 hours, the video had been shared over 1,000 times. By the next morning, that number had multiplied tenfold. People weren't just sharing the video. They were adding their own emotional responses, describing how Kaya's smile had moved them to tears, given them hope during difficult times, or simply brightened their day in ways they couldn't fully explain. Major news outlets began reaching out to the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, requesting permission to broadcast Kaya's story. The hashtag #YunrugKayaSmile began trending on multiple social media platforms. Within a week, Kaya's image had appeared on television screens and computer monitors around the globe, introducing millions of people to both her individual story and the broader crisis facing African elephants. The response was overwhelming in the most positive sense. Donation letters began arriving at the sanctuary from every continent, many accompanied by personal notes expressing how Kaya's story had touched the writers' hearts. Children sent artwork depicting Kaya's smile, elderly donors shared memories of their own encounters with elephants, and families organized fundraising drives in their communities to support the sanctuary's work. But perhaps the most meaningful impact was felt within the conservation community itself. Kaya's story demonstrated the power of individual narratives to connect people emotionally with broader environmental issues. While statistics about elephant poaching and habitat loss often felt abstract and overwhelming, Kaya's face and story made the crisis personal and immediate for millions of people who had never considered elephant conservation before. Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton, founder of Save the Elephants, noted that Kaya had achieved something that years of scientific research and advocacy had struggled to accomplish. She had made elephant conservation personally meaningful to a mainstream global audience. Her smile had become a symbol not just of resilience, but of hope for the entire species. As Kaya's fame spread around the world, her daily life in the shelter continued with remarkable normalcy. She remained blissfully unaware of her celebrity status, focused entirely on the simple pleasures of her routine, morning feedings, afternoon explorations of her enclosure, and the constant companionship of her human caregivers. Her happiness seemed to emanate from the basic joy of being alive and cared for, rather than from any external recognition or attention. The 2 weeks Kaya spent in isolation were carefully monitored and documented. Each day brought measurable improvements in her physical condition, weight gain, increased energy, stronger immune responses. But the psychological transformation was equally remarkable. From a traumatized orphan, Kaya had evolved into a confident, sociable young elephant who approached each day with obvious enthusiasm and trust. As her isolation period drew to a close, the staff began preparing for the next crucial phase of Kaya's rehabilitation. Soon she would leave the safety and simplicity of her individual shelter to join the larger community of orphaned elephants at the sanctuary. This transition would test whether her remarkable resilience and positive spirit could survive the challenges of group living and the more complex social dynamics that awaited her. The question that weighed on everyone's mind was whether Kaya's extraordinary smile would endure as her world expanded beyond the protective walls of her shelter into the wider community that would become her new family. The first weeks of Kessie's rehabilitation tested every assumption the Sheldrick Trust had about elephant care. Traditional feeding methods required an elephant's trunk to manipulate bottles and suckle properly. Without this critical appendage, Kessie could not feed in any conventional manner. Head keeper Edwin Lucici, a man with over 20 years of experience raising orphaned elephants, faced a problem unlike any in his career. How do you feed a baby elephant who cannot use the very tool evolution designed for the task? The answer required innovation, patience, and a deep understanding of elephant physiology. The breakthrough came when Edwin observed Kessie's attempts to drink water. Though clumsy and inefficient, she had learned to lower her head and drink directly with her mouth, much like a horse or cow might drink. Building on this natural adaptation, the team designed a specialized feeding system using wide, shallow bowls that allowed Kessie to access her milk formula without needing to manipulate a bottle. Those early feeding sessions were heartbreaking to witness. Kessie would approach the bowl cautiously, her movements uncertain and awkward. Without her trunk to guide and balance her, every action required extraordinary effort. Milk would often spill across her face and chest as she struggled to find the right angle and technique. Yet with each attempt, she showed remarkable determination to master this new way of living. Dr. Kenote worked tirelessly to address Kessie's medical needs. The infected wound required daily cleaning and antibiotic treatment. More challenging was managing Kessie's psychological trauma. Elephants are highly intelligent creatures with complex emotional lives, and losing a trunk represents not just physical disability, but profound psychological adjustment. In the wild, elephants use their trunks for countless daily activities beyond eating and drinking. They greet family members with gentle touches, comfort distressed young ones with reassuring strokes, and express emotions through intricate trunk gestures. For Kessie, learning to live without this primary means of communication and interaction was perhaps even more challenging than relearning how to feed herself. The turning point came when keeper Mary Kiringi joined Kessie's care team. Mary had a special gift with traumatized animals, an intuitive understanding of their emotional needs. She spent hours each day sitting quietly with Kessie, allowing the young elephant to become accustomed to human presence without pressure or demand. Slowly, Kessie began to respond to Mary's patient approach. Unable to reach out with her trunk as elephants naturally do, Kessie learned to use other forms of communication. She would gently bump Mary with her head, a gesture that became their special greeting. When content, she would lean against Mary's body, finding comfort in the physical connection that her truncated trunk could no longer provide. As weeks turned to months, Kessie's physical adaptations became increasingly remarkable. She developed extraordinary dexterity with her front feet, learning to manipulate objects with a precision that amazed her caregivers. Where once her trunk would have delicately plucked choice leaves from branches, she now used her feet to bend branches within reach of her mouth. Her feeding technique evolved from desperate splashing to methodical efficiency. She learned to position her body at optimal angles to access food and water, compensating for her disability through intelligence and determination. Watching her eat became a study in adaptive behavior, each meal demonstrating new innovations in her survival strategy. The other elephant orphans at the Trust initially approached Kessie with curiosity and confusion. Young elephants learn social behavior through interaction with their elders, and Kessie's appearance challenged their understanding of what an elephant should look like. Some of the more dominant orphans initially excluded her from their games and social groups. But elephants are remarkably compassionate creatures, and gradually the other orphans began to accept and even assist Kessie. Older orphans would break branches and place them within her reach, instinctively understanding her limitations. During feeding time, they would make space for her at the milk troughs, respecting her need for accommodation. One particularly touching relationship developed between Casey and an older orphan named Ambo, a 3-year-old bull who had lost his own mother to poachers. Ambo seemed to understand Casey's vulnerability and appointed himself as her protector. He would position himself between Casey and any perceived threats, and during arrest periods, he would lie close beside her, providing comfort and security. The psychological healing proved as important as the physical recovery. Dr. Angela Sheldrick, Dame Daphne's daughter and the Trust's current director, worked with animal behaviorists to understand how Kessie's disability might affect her long-term development. Elephants rely heavily on trunk-to-trunk contact for emotional bonding and stress relief. Without this capability, Kessie needed alternative methods for emotional regulation and social connection. The team observed that Kessie had developed her own unique ways of seeking and providing comfort. She would rest her head against other elephants, a behavior not typically seen in trunk-capable elephants. When distressed, rather than wrapping her trunk around herself as elephants commonly do for self-soothing, she would rock her entire body or seek close physical contact with her keepers. Perhaps most remarkably, Kessie began to display problem-solving abilities that exceeded expectations for her age. Faced with challenges that other elephants solve instinctively with their trunks, she was forced to think creatively. When toys or enrichment items were placed just out of easy reach, she would study the situation carefully before devising innovative approaches using her feet, head, or body positioning. This enhanced problem-solving ability extended to social situations as well. Unable to engage in typical elephant play behavior that relies heavily on trunk interaction, Casey invented new games with her companions. She would initiate play by gently bumping other orphans with her shoulder, then engaging in modified wrestling matches that accommodated her physical differences. As Casey's first birthday at the Trust approached, her transformation was remarkable. The weak, traumatized infant who had arrived near death had developed into a confident, adaptable young elephant with a unique personality shaped by her extraordinary circumstances. Her disability, rather than defining her limitations, had become the foundation for remarkable innovation and resilience. Yet questions remained about her future. While Casey had adapted beautifully to life in captivity with constant human support, the ultimate goal of the Sheldrick Trust was always to return orphans to the wild when possible. Could an elephant without a trunk survive in the harsh realities of natural elephant society? The answer to that question would determine whether Casey's story was one of successful rehabilitation or lifelong dependency. The team began planning for the next phase of Casey's journey, knowing that the true test of her adaptability lay ahead. In the wild, she would need to navigate complex social hierarchies, find food in challenging environments, and integrate into a natural elephant community that had never encountered an elephant quite like her. 18 months had passed since Kaya first smiled at the camera from her small shelter, and that image had transformed not just her own life, but the entire landscape of elephant conservation. The viral video had generated unprecedented global support for the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, resulting in funding that allowed for significant expansion of their rehabilitation facilities and programs. But more importantly, Kaya herself had evolved from a traumatized orphan into something extraordinary. A natural leader whose influence extended far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The sanctuary staff thought they were rescuing her from certain death in the Kenyan wilderness. Instead, Kaya had brought something to their community that was pure, joyful, and transformative. Her presence had created ripple effects that touched every aspect of their conservation work, from the daily care of other orphaned elephants to the international fundraising efforts that sustained their mission. Dr. Angela Sheldrick reflected on how Kaya had challenged many of their assumptions about elephant rehabilitation. Traditional approaches had focused primarily on addressing trauma and gradually rebuilding trust and confidence in orphaned calves. Kaya's case suggested that some elephants possessed an innate resilience that, when properly nurtured, could become a source of healing not just for themselves, but for entire communities of animals in recovery. The decision to advance Kaya to the next stage of rehabilitation, the gradual reintegration program that would eventually lead to release back into the wild, was both exciting and emotionally challenging for everyone involved. Over the months, Kaya had become more than just another rescue case. She had become the heart of their community, the elephant that visiting children asked about by name, and the face that represented hope for elephant conservation worldwide. The reintegration program at David Sheldrick operates on the principle that orphaned elephants must gradually relearn the complex social and survival skills that they would have naturally acquired from their mothers and extended family groups. This process typically takes several years and involves increasingly complex challenges designed to prepare the elephants for eventual independence in protected wild areas. Kaya's first test came with her introduction to a larger group of juvenile elephants, some of whom were much older and more established in the sanctuary's hierarchy. This group included elephants ranging from 2 to 6 years old, each with their own personalities, histories, and established social relationships. Successfully integrating into this more complex social environment would require all of Kaya's emotional intelligence and adaptability. The introductions were managed carefully over several weeks. Initially, Kaya was allowed to observe the larger group from adjacent enclosures, giving her time to understand the social dynamics and allowing the established elephants to become accustomed to her presence. The keepers watched carefully for signs of aggression, anxiety, or social rejection that could potentially derail Kaya's progress. What they observed instead was a continuation of the remarkable social patterns that Kaya had established with her first 3 companions. She seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of elephant social structures and an unusual ability to find her place within existing hierarchies without causing disruption or conflict. The older elephants initially regarded Kaya with a mixture of curiosity and caution that characterized most inter-elephant introductions. However, within days of her first direct contact with the group, something remarkable began to happen. Kaya's natural empathy and social grace began to transform the dynamics of the entire group in positive ways. Shukuru, a 4-year-old female who had been at the sanctuary for over 2 years, was known for her aggressive tendencies and difficulty sharing resources with other elephants. She had previously caused problems during feeding times and had to be carefully managed to prevent her from bullying smaller elephants. When Kaya joined the group, everyone expected potential conflicts over food and attention from the keepers. Instead, Shukuru seemed to be somehow calmed by Kaya's presence. Perhaps sensing that this smaller elephant posed no competitive threat, or possibly responding to Kaya's consistently non-aggressive approach to all interactions, Shukuru began displaying more cooperative behaviors. She started sharing access to preferred feeding areas and even began engaging in mutual grooming activities with Kaya and other group members. The keepers documented these behavioral changes meticulously, recognizing that they were witnessing something potentially significant for elephant rehabilitation practices worldwide. Dr. Joyce Poole, who had been following Kaya's story since her viral video first appeared, visited the sanctuary to observe these interactions firsthand. Her assessment was that Kaya displayed characteristics typically associated with matriarchal leadership in wild elephant herds, the ability to maintain group cohesion through empathy, patience, and intuitive social intelligence. As Kaya's confidence and leadership abilities developed, the staff began introducing more complex challenges designed to test her readiness for eventual wild release. These included foraging exercises where food was hidden in increasingly difficult locations, problem-solving challenges that required tool use and creative thinking, and exposure to the sounds and scents of wild elephant herds to gauge her interest in reconnecting with her own species in their natural environment. Kaya approached each new challenge with the same combination of curiosity and determination that had characterized her recovery from the beginning. She became particularly skilled at teaching other elephants the solutions to foraging puzzles, often demonstrating techniques multiple times with obvious patience until her companions mastered the required skills. During this period, Kaya's celebrity status continued to grow worldwide. The sanctuary received visitors from every continent who had come specifically to meet the elephant whose smile had touched their hearts through viral media. These encounters provided valuable socialization opportunities for Kaya, who seemed to genuinely enjoy meeting new people and appeared to understand that she held a special place in their affections. Children were particularly drawn to Kaya, perhaps recognizing a kindred spirit in her obvious joy and playfulness. The sanctuary began organizing special educational programs centered around Kaya's story, using her journey from traumatized orphan to confident young elephant as a vehicle for teaching about conservation, resilience, and the importance of protecting wildlife habitats. These educational encounters had profound impacts on visitors. Many reported that meeting Kaya had fundamentally changed their understanding of elephants as intelligent, emotionally complex beings deserving of protection and respect. The sanctuary staff began receiving letters from families who had restructured their vacation plans to visit Kenya, specifically to support elephant conservation, donations from children who had organized fundraisers in their schools, and testimonials from adults who described how Kaya's story had inspired them to become more environmentally conscious in their daily lives. But perhaps the most significant development during this period was Kaya's first encounter with wild elephants. The David Sheldrick Trust maintains several sites where rehabilitated elephants can interact with wild herds while still receiving support and protection from human caregivers. These interactions are crucial for assessing an elephant's readiness for complete independence and for providing opportunities to learn behaviors that can only be transmitted by fully wild elephants. Kaya's first exposure to wild elephants occurred during a supervised visit to one of these interface areas. A small herd of wild elephants had been observed in the vicinity, and the keepers decided that Kaya and several of her companions were ready for this crucial test of their social development and wild instincts. The moment Kaya detected the scent of wild elephants, her behavior shifted dramatically. All of her playful, domestic-oriented activities ceased, and she became intensely focused on the new sensory information she was processing. Her trunk worked constantly, analyzing air currents and ground scents, while her ears rotated like radar dishes, seeking audio confirmation of what her other senses were detecting. When the wild herd finally came into view, Kaya's reaction was immediate and profound. She began vocalizing in patterns that the keepers had never heard from her before. Deep, resonant calls that seemed to emerge from some genetic memory of appropriate wild elephant communication. Her entire body language changed, adopting the alert, dignified posture characteristic of wild elephants assessing unfamiliar situations. The response from the wild herd was cautiously positive. The matriarch, a large female estimated to be in her 40s, approached the interface area with obvious curiosity about these semi-domestic elephants. Her assessment of Kaya seemed particularly thorough, involving extended trunk-to-trunk contact and what elephant researchers recognize as detailed olfactory investigation. What happened next surprised even the most experienced elephant handlers present. The wild matriarch began engaging with Kaya in what appeared to be deliberate teaching behavior. She demonstrated proper foraging techniques for local vegetation, showed Kaya how to test ground conditions before walking on potentially unstable surfaces, and even engaged in what looked like lessons about appropriate response to various environmental sounds and threats. This interaction continued for over 3 hours, with Kaya displaying a remarkable ability to understand and respond to the wild elephant's communications. By the end of the encounter, she was successfully mimicking complex behaviors that typically take months or years for orphaned elephants to learn in traditional rehabilitation settings. The implications of this interaction were profound for Kaya's future and for elephant rehabilitation practices generally. It suggested that she possessed not only the physical readiness for wild integration, but the social intelligence necessary to be accepted by and learn from wild elephant communities. This was a crucial milestone that many orphaned elephants never achieve. Over the following months, Kaya's wild encounters became more frequent and extended. She began participating in overnight experiences where she and her companions would spend entire nights in areas frequented by wild herds, learning to forage naturally and experiencing the rhythms and challenges of wild elephant life while still maintaining the security of human oversight. During one of these overnight experiences, an event occurred that would mark the true completion of Kaya's transformation. A large wild herd that had been frequenting the area approached the group of rehabilitating elephants during the early morning hours. Instead of the cautious formal interactions that had characterized previous encounters, this meeting had an entirely different quality. The wild matriarch, who had encountered Kaya several times before, approached her with what could only be described as invitation behavior. Using trunk gestures and vocalizations that elephant researchers recognize as recruitment calls, she seemed to be inviting Kaya to join her herd's morning foraging activities. For the keepers observing from a distance, this represented the moment they had been working toward for over 2 years, the indication that Kaya was ready to be accepted as a full member of a wild elephant community. The decision about whether to allow this integration to proceed naturally or to intervene and bring Kaya back to the sanctuary for continued human-managed care would determine the ultimate success of her rehabilitation. The choice was made to allow Kaya to follow her instincts. She joined the wild herd that morning, participating in their foraging activities with obvious competence and joy. Her signature smile, which had captivated millions of people through viral media, was now being shared with wild elephants who recognized her as one of their own. Kaya wasn't waiting anymore. She wasn't hoping for someone to choose her, because now she was exactly where she belonged. She had found her true home, not just as an individual elephant, but as a contributing member of a wild elephant society. The keepers continued to monitor Kaya's progress through radio collar technology and regular observation from a respectful distance. What they documented over the following months was a complete transformation from rescued orphan to integral herd member. Kaya not only adapted successfully to wildlife, but she began displaying the teaching behaviors with younger elephants that had characterized her time at the sanctuary. Most remarkably, Kaya maintained her characteristic optimism and social grace in the wild environment. Researchers documented instances where her presence seemed to calm conflicts within the herd and where her playful interactions with calves brought obvious joy to the entire community. The qualities that had made her special in captivity were proving equally valuable in the wild. Occasionally, Kaya would return to the areas near the sanctuary, sometimes bringing members of her adopted wild family with her. During these visits, she would approach familiar keepers with obvious recognition and affection, but her body language made clear that she was now a wild elephant choosing to interact with humans rather than a dependent animal seeking care. These reunion encounters were profoundly moving for the staff who had invested so much time and emotion in Kaya's recovery. Sarah, who had been with Kaya since her first days in isolation, described watching her confidently leading wild calves in foraging activities as one of the most rewarding moments of her conservation career. The last documented sighting of Kaya occurred during the dry season, approximately 3 years after her initial rescue. She was observed with a herd of over 30 elephants, including several calves who appeared to be learning complex social behaviors through their interactions with her. Her collar indicated that she had traveled over 500 kilometers since joining her wild family, covering territory that included some of the most pristine elephant habitat remaining in East Africa. In that final observation, researchers noted that Kaya still displayed the facial expression that had made her famous, that unmistakable curve of the trunk and brightness of the eyes that looked exactly like a smile. But now this expression was being shared with wild elephant calves, teaching them something about joy and resilience that no human intervention could have provided. Some elephants don't just find home, they become home for everyone around them. Kaya's legacy extended far beyond her individual success story. The global attention generated by her viral video had resulted in funding that allowed the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust to expand their operations significantly, helping hundreds of additional elephants over the years following her release. Educational programs inspired by her story were implemented in schools across Africa and beyond, teaching new generations about the importance of wildlife conservation and the complex emotional lives of elephants. Perhaps most importantly, Kaya had demonstrated that elephant rehabilitation could achieve outcomes that exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. Her transformation from traumatized orphan to wild herd leader had established new benchmarks for what was possible in conservation work, inspiring researchers and practitioners to develop more ambitious and effective approaches to wildlife recovery. From a small shelter in Kenya, Kaya's smile had indeed changed everything. She had proven that hope could flourish anywhere, even in the most difficult circumstances. Sometimes all the world needs is one smile to transform everything, and Kaya had given that gift not just to the humans who loved her, but to an entire wild elephant community that now carried her spirit forward into the vast African wilderness where she truly belonged. Her story became a permanent reminder that every individual animal has the potential to impact their world in profound and unpredictable ways. In saving one orphaned elephant calf, the conservation community had gained not just a single success story, but a symbol of possibility that would inspire elephant protection efforts for generations to come. The little elephant who couldn't stop smiling had found her place in the world, and in finding it, she had made that world a brighter, more hopeful place for all the elephants who would follow in her footsteps.